feel like a freak? Feel like a freak? Feel like a freak? Feel like a freak?
And you will once again be fighting for our freedom, not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, exist. One voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not diminish the fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive.
Hi there, social media peeps. Jonathan here from Some Talented People with a show, a brand new show, in fact. Do you feel like a freak? Know your value? This is a presentation in collaboration with Business Live Global, who are the radio station that will be hosting this recording. It will also be out on all of our feeds, YouTube, everywhere you go, wherever you consume your social, we will be there. It's a radio show in collaboration with Joseph K. Muscat, and I'll tell you a bit more about it. But first of all, I'd like to meet our guests for this first inaugural show. So who should we go to? I think really we better go Joseph first because he's the co-conspirator.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph K. Muscat. I am a consultant. I am also neurodivergent myself, and I help businesses as well as individuals reach their potential as well as higher profits through understanding who they know, who they work with by recognizing neurodiversity in the workplace and with their entrepreneurship.
Nice. Gabrielle.
I am Gabrielle Dublazine. I'm an intercultural consultant and trainer and educator. I deal with diversity at the workforce, and also I'm lecturing at the Malta Leadership Institute.
Sorry, say that again.
I'm lecturing at the Malta Leadership Institute for dealing with diversity in the workforce, managing diversity in the workforce, and managing neurodiversity. I have a background in psychology, and so I'm helping neurodiverse people to cope with themselves. And I help also people at the workplace to build an inclusive workforce.
Excellent, excellent. Shirin.
Hello everyone, I'm Sharon Lovegrove, and I help women with imposter syndrome who really struggle. And one of the things is a lot of the struggling is often because of their neurodiversity. So they've learned to be different in a way of almost like becoming somebody else, lots of somebody else's in their roles in their life. And part of my job is to help them see who they are and how they can manage all of these things together in managing in life. So that's what I do.
That's very nice, excellent. And finally, but not in any way lower down the pecking order, Andrew.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Andrew Marsh, and I'm never quite sure whether I'm allowed to say I have Asperger's or I'm an Asperger. I was discovering that there's a difference in terminology. But I used to be a geologist in the construction industry before I knew I had Asperger's syndrome. And I realized back then, or even when I was growing up, that I was different. Always known I was different, but didn't know why. So when I got my diagnosis 7 years ago, everything fell into place. I understand why I was different, why people treated me differently, why I was different in groups. And I now use the skills that I've developed and coping mechanisms I've developed growing up and working in the construction industry to put strategies together to help employers and employees better manage people with Asperger's syndrome or with neurodivergent needs in the workplace, because they are an amazing hidden talent pool and you need to get the best out of them. And you can't necessarily do that by dealing with them and managing them in the same way as you would with neurotypical people. So that's my aim. I'm an author, speaker, and a coach. Thank you for having me on today.
No problems. Thank you for being here. Just a quick message then from our sponsor.
We listen to you all the time.
80s, 90s, and more.
I love it.
This is the best online radio station.
Streaming 24/7. 24/7.
So this is a show of my and Joseph's devising, although the title Feel Like a Freak was definitely my choosing. I very much enjoy the tag freak, which I give to myself on a routine basis. In fact, on my profile on LinkedIn, it says at the bottom, smiley devil face, obscenely expensive smiley devil face, because I just think that there is, as Andrew said, a huge resource of diversity all across the spectrums that employers are not currently maximizing. And what I wanted to do from a Business Live global perspective, this radio show podcast is going to be transmitted in 22 countries around the world. And what I'd like to do through our conversation is resonate with as many of you listening, watching as we can through the stories of our guests. So that's my aim for this. Joseph, what's your motivation?
Well, my motivation, I mean, just to give you an idea of my neurodiversity or how I take it though, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. So it's quite different than yours, but I do recognize it, and I see because of the love-hate relationship, I see the importance of of identifying, recognizing, and bringing to the attention to the challenges that I face on both in a personal and professional life, and bringing more awareness, educating employers and managers in regards to understanding about who they work with has become my purpose and mission. And this is what my business is about, as well as my own personal podcast, and how I try to bring attention and acknowledgement about that. And there's a huge depth of misunderstanding about what neurodiversity is and how to communicate more effectively, and realizing that there's a huge talent pool that either A, they already are employing, or B, that they have been excluding for such a long time. And it's time to change the model.
I don't know if other people have noticed this, but Joseph, you appear slightly out of focus.
Yeah, my camera has been acting up. I have to go buy a new camera, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
Yes.
You don't think it's just grease off your finger or something like that?
It could be. I'll have to maybe give it a clean.
Okay, we'll give it. Yeah, to be honest, your voice is enough. We haven't got your beautiful visage, we know, is just a bonus. So
thank you.
The definition then of neurodiverse. Gabrielle, you have the psychological background. Tell me and tell our viewers what neurodiversity means from your perspective.
Well, neurodiversity, I think, is one of the most misunderstood terms, and it actually tempts the viewer or the listener to pigeonhole. Neurodiversity cannot be pigeonholed. It is very complex. And sometimes it's absolutely misunderstood, because people with symptoms of dyslexia, with symptoms of Asperger's, with symptoms of ADHD must not necessarily be neurodiverse. The difference that might be new to you, Jonathan, yes, but I find it to make it a point to say that here. The difference is in the extreme when it hits you. For example, how do you cope when you feel overwhelmed? What is your attitude towards life, your situation? How your ability to develop coping mechanisms, and this is a gradient, as a matter of fact. You see, that there is the way how you view yourself and how you are viewed from a medical perspective, but also how you are viewing to yourself from a therapeutic perspective. And it's all about the gradient of functionality.
Mm.
So I invite every participant to look a little bit further, to read a little bit more up into when is it neurodiverse or not, because that would explode the scope of this show to go to go in detail into that, but there is a difference. So, and my own take is to share a little bit of my experience with you, and also to help you, because what I met working with many people in that spectrum, I call it neurodiverse spectrum, is to develop the right coping mechanism, or to understand what is normal, and from what perspective do we view norm and normal. And I enjoy very much Jonathan's attitude is that he loves his tag freak, because freak has two aspects. One is the freedom to be who you are, but it also is the standing or the accepting that freaking out and learning what it is when I freak out and when I freak with. You see, we have conceptualized terms, we have stereotyped terms, and we use terms, society uses terms and terminologies according to the trend, what's currently in or out, or hip or not, or what is commonly acceptable depending of the culture of the respective society.
Where are you based, Gabrielle?
I am based in Malta, and I must admit I'm not a little bit innocent. I'm not innocent on Joseph's development. So we are both partners in crime, so to say.
Okay.
And the transition from, because we are constantly human becomings. We are not human beings. We are constantly in a state of becoming and transitioning. And I'm very, very happy to be part of the show, but also to be part in Joseph's mission, what he set out to do, because I feel it is, and what you are doing, Jonathan, I feel, because it is so very important to bring a holistic perspective.
So, Shireen, you mentioned in your introduction that you discover yourself and you rediscover yourself. So this gradient thing, what was your perspective? I didn't even know about this gradient. Did you?
Yeah.
Ah.
Well, I think I start to think about imposter syndrome as a spectrum as well, because everything is a spectrum, whereas the norm is determined mostly by culture, isn't it, really? So culture says this is what it is. A lot of people manage perfectly well, but there's quirks, yeah? So it's when, and what beautiful thing that Gabrielle really put in there is, what do you do when something goes wrong? What's your reaction when something goes wrong? How are you held? How do you manage? And what happens to you in that situation? And really, that's probably how we got to live in the world. We have to know how to help people manage to be free and to be able to express themselves in the maximum of their potential that they can. And I think what's often happened, as Gabriella said, is we pinpoint, we put people into categories because it is easier, yes, but what happens is we lock them into categories, and we don't see the breadth and the depth and the unique differences or the unique genius of each human. And because we're unable to move out of our own mindsets, right? And so we're looking through this filter of whatever culture decides. I mean, I always remember a story where, in Africa, certainly a long time ago, is where most of the cultures, if you had children that were schizophrenic, they were seen as shamans, right? They were seen as shamans, and they were taken away. They were managed, they were helped, they were given a purpose, they were esteemed. And then what happened? We have people with schizophrenia, or we have them having hallucinations. We all have hallucinations. When we talk to ourselves, we have hallucinations. We hear voices, all of us. We just don't choose to listen and discern, where's that voice coming from, right? So what happens is we automatically think someone is mad because they do something that's slightly different because we're uncomfortable. And it's really about how do we be comfortable with the discomfort and look to be curious about what this person brings and what this person is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew,
Yes.
when I was talking before we started recording, luckily, so it isn't on the recording, I asserted that I thought that neurodivergent brains were I did say better than neurotypical brains, and you challenged me and you said different. So this thing about you being a geologist. So, right. Asperger, like, you have to get this for me and for our viewers. As I understand, Asperger's is on the ASD spectrum, and things that I'm aware of is a real attention to detail, an amazing focus. You can sort of close out the whole of the world and just do a thing. Do you think that's how you ended up in geology?
Well, I can tell you exactly how I ended up in geology.
Please do.
I was 14 years old. We were picking our subjects to study for O-level at school. And we had 2 core subjects, which was maths and English, and you had 6 subjects to choose from. And I picked 5, and I had 1 left, and I didn't know what to pick. And one of my friends from my geography class, so the geography class we were in, said, you like volcanoes and mountains and rivers and things like that. Why don't you try geology? So I looked at it and thought about it and went, geology? Well, maybe, sounds interesting. So I looked at it, it fitted in the timetable. And so I did geology. So I did geology at O-level. I naturally did geology at A-level. The people that I was with in my groups at school, friends, they sort of encouraged me, well, we're going to go on to do degrees. We're going to go to universities. What are you going to do? And it wasn't a case of, what are you going to do in the sense of, are you going to go and get a job but it was, we've just all done A-levels together. What subject are you going to do for degree? And I fell into it, and I fell into doing a geology degree. At that point, I suddenly realized that actually I could call myself a geologist, and I quite enjoy what I do. I'll see if I can get a job in it. Got a degree. I then got a master's, and I applied for jobs as geologists, and I got a job in Glasgow, and I've been in the area ever since. And that's how I became a geologist, because someone said to me, you've got a space in your timetable, do geology, you'll like it. That's exactly how I became a geologist. So to answer the sort of the other part of the question is, there's an awful lot of physical mental attributes and things that people who are on the spectrum have that they are particularly good at, and there's sometimes they're not particularly good at. I'll give you an example. I'm a very organized person. I have files over there, I have files over there, I have a drawing cabinet there, and I've got bookshelves over there. And if someone came in and moved something, I would know just by walking into the room, scanning it with my eyes, someone has been in and moved something. And yet there are other people with Asperger's or autism who are completely messy. It's in that bundle over there somewhere, or it's buried under that pile of paper there somewhere. So whilst there are traits and characteristics that people who have autism and Asperger's exhibit, not everyone on the spectrum has all of those traits and characteristics. I'm going to give you an analogy, please, of how I view the spectrum of Asperger's syndrome. Okay. See this thing here? This is a kebab. This is a wooden kebab skewer. Imagine you had a grapefruit in one hand and you shoved the kebab skewer through the grapefruit, so that you have about a third of it sticking out one end to the blunt end, a third of it in the grapefruit, and a third of it with the pointy end sticking out the other end. Imagine the pointy end is 100% and the blunt end is 0%. Okay, we've all got that?
Yeah.
Imagine if you had 10 of those kebab skewers through the grapefruit. Now imagine if you had 1,000 or 10,000 kebab skewers through that grapefruit, and each kebab skewer was one characteristic or trait of Asperger's syndrome and the spectrum, and everyone sat on a different place on that kebab skewer on all 10,000 of them. So some people are going to be 100% for some things, they're going to be 0% for other things, they might be 24% for something else. And every single person on the spectrum with Asperger's, and you can extend that to autism as well, because it's all part of the same makeup, sits on a different place on that spectrum. And that is what your spectrum is. It's not linear from A to B, one characteristic. There's 10,000 of them. There's 100,000 of them. There's a plethora. There's as many as you want them to be. And everyone sits differently on those, on every single kebab skewer. And that's why some people are fantastic at certain things and they're dreadful at other things, or they're not particularly good at other things. Sorry, dreadful is not a good word to use. So to say they're better or they're worse, I use different, because when you look at the definition of Asperger's, can I read this, or am I taking up too much?
No.
Okay, this is a clinical definition of Asperger's syndrome that I got off the internet. Asperger's syndrome is an autism spectrum disorder, one of a distinct group of complex neurodevelopmental disorders characterized by social impairment, communication difficulties, and restrictive, repetitive, and stereotypical patterns of behavior. That's a horrible definition, isn't it? That's very clinical. It says nothing about the abilities and the skills and the specialisms of that person. No. It uses the word disorder twice, and I hate it for that, because disorder implies there's something wrong with you. If you say someone's got a disorder, there's something wrong with you. When no, there's not something. Actually, there's an awful lot right with them. You've just got to find it. You've got to nurture it. You've got to encourage it. And I'm just going to turn this card over, because on the back of this card, I've got my 30, that was 30 words. I've got my 30-word definition of Asperger's syndrome. See if you like the difference. Joseph looks like he knows this. Yeah. We had a very, very good conversation for an hour and a half, Joseph and I, on this podcast. Cool. Asperger's syndrome is an autism spectrum condition characterized by unique problem-solving skills, a highly developed imagination, and a flair for innovation in design, engineering, science, computing, and the arts. That's my 30-word definition of Asperger's, and I relate to that. That's what I relate to. If you're going to pin me against a wall and say, what are you? I'll tell me what skewer you're on. I'm on all of those skewers, but that's what mine means. It is so important. It is so important not to label, and both Gabrielle and Shireen both mentioned a word which I, in the context of what we're talking about, I hate. It's the word normal. Because what is normal? How do you define normal? Exactly. If you start looking at it, then there's race, there's color, there's sexual identity, there's gender, there's hair color, there's eye color, there's size of feet. Do they wear glasses? Have they got hearing problems? Have they got dentures? Do they wear a wig? Have they got long hair? Have they got short hair? Have they got tattoos? Have they got piercings? You break all of that down into all of us, and guess what you get? You get 7 billion different people, because that's exactly what we are. Do you think people still wear wigs? Yes. Really? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. My wife. Not a 70s Afro wig for a disco, an actual wig for hair. Really? When my wife had cancer and chemotherapy, she lost her hair. And when she lost her hair, they were brilliant. They sent her away to get a brilliant wig made for her, and she wore the wig. She didn't wear it very often, but from time to time she would wear the wig, and it was absolutely fine with that. And it's just what made her feel comfortable at the time on that day. And indeed, I was thinking more about the I was thinking more about men in the 70s on TV used to wear these wigs, which were awful. Yeah, obviously for medical needs, you would need to get in there. But I mean, Tina Turner wears wigs. She had an accident as a young adult where a lot of her hair got burnt off, and she wears wigs.
Oh,
And all sorts of people with wigs. Lady Gaga wears wigs all the time. She's got a different hairstyle every time you see her, because that's who she identifies with. That's who she wants to be at that particular time, whether she's doing an appearance, putting on a show, or doing an interview. So why not people wear wigs? Why not?
so let me ask the room this question. Although I can perfectly well accept what Andrew's saying, that we're all different, there will be certain things. So in your definition of autism, Andrew, there are certain things you've identified as being common. So, Joseph, you've been on this neurodiversity journey since we spoke, what, a year or so ago?
About a year ago, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me what your purpose, your mission is.
Well, to understand that, you have to understand me. I mean, I was diagnosed at a very young age.
Okay.
And my diagnosis doesn't fall into the category of the top ones, you know, such as dyslexia or ADHD. Mine is more visual motor, visual perception, and working memory. So it's in neurodiversity, but doesn't fall into the major categories. And if anything, visual perception gets often misdiagnosed as being dyslexic. So with my journey has taken me to a very long aspect where definitely issues with school, running my own business and ran into issues, trying to find support, and everything's out there is geared towards kids. So, you know, when you're in the school system, if done correctly, and you've been identified and you have the right teachers, you can develop the support and develop the coping mechanisms and learn to succeed outside of school. But if you're dealing with teachers who haven't been trained or doesn't understand the coping mechanisms and help you identify, and this is where my love-hate situation comes into play, is if I was defined and shown how to use my strengths more effectively, then I think I would have been more effective, not only as a student, but definitely as an entrepreneur. And sometimes, you know, some people are able to do it intuitively, others not. And I think, again, if I've had more of a guidance, things maybe have been different. So through the adulthood, running my own business, still ran into the issues, but everything I tried to find out there is geared towards kids because it's seen as a childhood issue rather than a lifelong issue. So I came to a point in the last 2 years, especially, and prior to this, I'd never really disclosed my neurodiversity. So it's only been in the last year to 2 years I've really, truly been outspoken about who I am and what I have. And I came to the conclusion that during my entrepreneurship and even during my employment, that there was no support structure, and businesses don't understand who they're employing. And there needed to be a voice for the employee or for the entrepreneur who needs that support and needs to have that clarification in the workplace. And that requires bringing that voice into the workplace and educating employers and managers and human resources. That also goes into the entrepreneur. I mean, 1/3 of entrepreneurs are neurodiverse. So, and why have they left? I mean, we take a look at statistically, many leave the workplace due to mental health reasons because they're not getting the support they need from their managers or their employers. They end up starting their own businesses. And we find out that a lot of neurodiverse become very successful entrepreneurs. And why? Because they built it all around the following model. They built around focusing on their strengths and adding support around their challenges, basically what they were not getting in the workplace. So when you understand that journey and you understand why I've taken on this cause, then you can see why it becomes very outspoken about this, and why we need to change the perspective of how people view, because going back to Shireen's point, what is normal?
Mm,
You know,
mm.
there's, you know, there is really no normal. I mean, if you want to take a look at normality, you look at the mirror and you think, "Or that's what normal looks like because I'm normal, and so I expect everyone else to be like me," which really isn't the case. And
What? I'm just going to stop you there just to have
Yeah.
a quick message from our sponsor.
You're listening to Business Live Global, where your business meets the rest of the world.
So it's interesting then that this nature of spectrums, the grapefruit analogy, I think is a good one in that so many different subsects. So both Shireen and Gabrielle, you're dealing with majority female customers, or not? Well, okay. In that case, Shireen, tell me about your customer base from a neurodivergent perspective.
So yeah, I suppose what I think about an idea that everybody being unique and all in a way, in their own unique way, neurotypical, because we always look at things and think, oh wow, okay, that's me. And I think from a nature's point of view, we try and always have sameness because that is a kind of a safety kind of mechanism. But I think for women that have imposter syndrome, a lot of it is based in what happened as early cultural programming, and also the fact that, you know, women tend to experience trauma quite differently. So the way they experience life and the way they view it. And I think that so many women are incredibly clever in the way they adapt. Yeah. So an interesting thing, as I said early on, is most women work with feelings. Most women, I'm not saying all women, because there are a lot of women that are disconnected and they can't connect to those feelings. But each of them will do strategies that will make them uniquely good at things. So you know, I used to work as a nurse. I could walk into a ward. I would know who was going to crash and who wouldn't, and I wouldn't know why. And I would be able to look at everyone, and I could see differences constantly. It was like I was watching different images of them moving all of the time. And sometimes I didn't know what was really real or not real, except I would know that there was a slightly different sense of density. So, but to tell people about those sort of things. So a lot of women have a lot of intuition, but they also don't experience that as being kind in the big world, because when we say, oh, I have a hunch, I have an intuition, nobody bothers to ask them, well, what is that intuition about? Where does it come from? How do you find out what it means? So what happens is they lose connection with that part of them that is actually really good. And they don't know how to utilize it well. And so they make assumptions on that after that.
That's sorry to cut there. I just thought as you were saying that I posited in my last book that every child below 7 is neurodivergent in a massive, like the sort of thing where you're talking about. So my experience is I have dyslexia, and I'm lucky insofar as I had a bunch of strokes and lost connection with everything and had to rebuild it. And this was something I didn't know other people couldn't do, but I was watching myself rebuild my brain because I was having to learn to walk and talk and do all these things again. So the visual representations, I was watching them going, oh, that's interesting. And then I realized that I could hold 3 to 6 different perspectives of the same scene in one thing. And then I also have terrible pain from a motorcycle accident I had 26 years ago. So I'm in agony all day long. So what I started doing was mucking around with the spectrums, so color spectrum, infrared spectrum, anything I've seen, I can paint the world that color, that filter. It's like, you know, show me a filter and I can change that for anything. And until I found out about myself, I assumed, because I had a major brain injury, so I'm thinking, well, look, I'm struggling. So I had just assumed everyone saw that. And it's like, and I had to contemplate on this for, it took me 18 months to try to put myself in the head of someone who only has one perspective, to realize that what this means to me as a lived experience is that the world, the very nature of reality, is entirely fluid. You hit me with a stone or a stick, fair enough, it exists. You tell me something is possible or impossible, no, you might think that, but that's not at all true. So dive in on this conversation. I don't want to leave this anymore. Someone, Joseph, take over.
Well, again, it comes back to the aspect where people need to understand how people think differently and what their perspective of the world is. And that's something that often gets, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lack of communication and understanding because of it. Because again, it goes back to the aspect of not only what, it goes back to the aspect of what is normal, but also the aspect of, you know, everyone's a Ken doll, right? So what do you do when someone is not a Ken doll? And then how do you communicate with them? They're not willing to accept or adapt to the person who is not like them or like everyone else. And then it becomes this conflict of how can we try to bridge a communication between each other so that we can see. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to pick you up on that because we were talking about what is normal, and like Shirin said, everybody has an internal voice. Everybody has things they experience as dreams, hallucinations, whatever you want to call it. And Andrew was saying that there's 7, 8 billion different versions of the skewer. So how can any enterprise bigger than one person even begin to deal with this? Gabrielle.
Well, I'm listening intently to the back and forth and how you collect the thoughts and ideas. Actually, when we have to learn, like you had to learn and to identify, and also what Andrew said, finally I was diagnosed, I could organize myself. How do we orient ourselves in an ocean? How do we navigate our being? We need, and that is what you try to do, or I assume you try to do, we're trying to find a constant with your question, what is common? So common, not in the sense of common from a cultural or social acceptable perspective, but more in the sense of where is the overarching theme that could serve me as an anchor to identify my uniqueness and my difference and my fluidity. So, but our society and our brain always, as I keep saying, it tries to pigeonhole and to stereotype. Because we need to, this is a natural, a biological need for a sort of a safety. Because in a world where I don't know myself, what do I know? How do I measure? How do I structure my day? How do I structure my life? You see? So, and from that comes always the comparison, almost the compulsion to compare myself with what? To what? It is actually a base of a drive to belong.
Well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is it's the second most.
Which are not really, which are anymore a little bit outdated, because Hollow, they discovered that the monkey holds on to the fluffy surrogate, even if the fluffy surrogate doesn't give any food, because it's fluffy and gives you warmth.
Right.
So there are so many, again, we found something, that's it, you see? And the beautiful thing in science is there is always the hypothesis, and there's always one margin which is there to explain an exemption. And here comes back what Andrew said. There are so many perspectives within a perspective, but what is common? I need to hold myself, otherwise I get lost in the perspectives. So I need to understand what is common in order to develop a coping mechanism, you see.
Ooh, right, other people dive in on this, but it occurred. So in your work, Gabrielle, Andrew, in your work, what you're doing is you're helping people that have maybe felt different for a while but not known what it is, or maybe have had a diagnosis, but we're pretty certain now that diagnosis really is something that more neurotypical brains do for this sense of belonging, sense of tribe, which is primeval. When I started down my journey, I noticed it as a binary thing, like bonk, yeah, that person's like me, or bonk, no, it's just a different energy. So I notice a different energy very distinctly from other neurodivergents, typically, to what would be what I used to call the norms. If the spectrum is 180 degrees, I thought that very neurodivergent people, so functional, Andrew, that their condition does not hamper what they do, but enhances what they do. I think that's probably, the sort of 85th, 90th percentile. You've then got a whole block of people that are entrepreneurs that, as Joseph pointed out, then you've got people who just have mild occurrences, and then you have people who are more neurotypical. What's people's view on that?
I think there's a difficulty that I have with someone saying, and I know you didn't specifically say this, but someone saying, oh, they have mild autism, or they have mild Asperger's, or they have mild dyslexia, because what you're actually meaning is it's how it is impacted on others and how the others see it.
Exactly.
You either have dyslexia or you don't. You can't have, well, I don't know about dyslexia, but with Asperger's, I have Asperger's. I don't have 70% Asperger's, I have Asperger's. And my representation of that Asperger's will be completely different to the next person you see has Asperger's syndrome. But we have a commonality amongst us. So it's how others behave around you, it's how others react to you, and it's how you behave in the circumstances of other people, be they team members, managers, and so on. That's how it manifests itself. So there's not a mild Asperger's. You either have Asperger's or you don't. But it's how that relates to the people around you and how they react to it and how easy or difficult you get on with them. I mean, I had a geological career before I knew I had Asperger's, and there were times that I got on quite well with my colleagues and my bosses, and things were fine, because that was their human nature. That was their ability to see the skills and the abilities that I had, rather than, oh, hang on, he's not particularly good at that, so let's all focus on that and berate him for that and degrade him for that. What they ultimately wanted was that you delivered a job that was the right standard in the right time. And if there's social aspects of you involved around that, then you have to find ways to manage that and deal with that. So it's about the reaction and the treatment of you by others is how it's viewed, which is different from how you have it.
May I ask? Oh, please, no, Gabrielle.
May I add to that? What is very important to understand who you are is also to understand what your needs are and how to communicate the needs to others so that others can understand how to treat you and how to collaborate with you. Because we sometimes assume the others have the sort of a glass ball effect. We have established that there are differences in behavior and being, but how can we communicate this, how we want to be treated? For example, conflicts often arise because overwhelmedness can only be communicated in an emotional expression or in a withdrawal or in an explosion, and the others see what's going on right now. But there is a step before. Once I understand where my boundaries are, where my limits are, to what extent can I process information, to what extent can I function within a team, within a group of people, is how do I communicate that? For example, Joseph and we work together also in an organization, other things. So may I use your example, Joseph? Do you give me permission? Ahead. So when Joseph says, wait a moment, for example, I need to be processing step by step. So give it to me step by step. So then I said, oh, wait a moment. Yes, I'm a multitasker, so I automatically assume that you also are as swift as I am in multitasking, for example. I use this example and I asked Joseph's permission to give this example because it's very important to communicate our boundaries before we overreact by either withdrawing or by expressing our displeasure in one way or the other, or avoiding. We have different strategies, like either we avoid the person, we avoid the situation, or so when we set the boundaries and give the boundaries in that sense to say, I need, by expressing our needs, by verbalizing our needs, I need this step-by-step information in order to collaborate or to work together with you. That is a clear communication.
Okay, just a quick word from our sponsors.
Yo, what's up? Baby, let's go! Top business tips, extraordinary entrepreneur interviews, cuckoo reviews, promotional films, and so much more. This is your Business Live Global.
Go on, Andrew.
Sorry, I just want to. One of the things that I do when I'm working with people who work in a work environment is try to find ways that they can help their managers and their supervisors communicate with them. And that's by saying, I need a checklist. I want a procedure. I want a rote. I want to know step by step by step. Because what you're actually doing in a very gentle, very subtle, not in a big brothery kind of way, you're actually training the people around you and your managers in how best to communicate with you. And that is so important, that communication is a two-way thing. You cannot have a business relationship, a working relationship with someone when it is all dictatorial. You shall do bang, bang, bang. There are things that need to be done in business. You need to do this task and this task, but it's how you go about instructing, guiding the person doing that task so that they feel ownership of it and they can have a sense of pride in doing it, but then still meet the deliverable objectives to your boss, to your supervisor, to your client. So it's really important that that process of backwards and forwards that you have with your colleagues and with your supervisor, what you're actually doing is training them how to communicate with you so that they can get the best out of you. And that's
Okay,
really
so
important.
what I'd like to ask then,
Hold on, Jonathan.
Go on.
Sorry, Jonathan, I want to step in here a little bit.
Yep.
So keep that question on hold and hopefully you remember it as well. But right now, though, we have to put into perspective, though. I mean, I agree with what Andrew has said, and I agree with what Maria Gabrielle has said. But we have to put into perspective, though, that we're kind of putting the cart before the horse, okay? Which is people need to know who they are in order to be able to communicate. Yes. People have to understand what they have. And, so going to your point, or even Jonathan's point about minor, I was told my dyslexia, because I'm technically, I would say 50% dyslexic. And I say that again, because often visual perception gets misdiagnosed as being dyslexic. So I'm a little bit unsure if I really am dyslexic, but I was told it was minor. Okay, well, what does minor mean? All right, how does that affect me? And how is that affecting my performance in a relationship or in a job or in my business? And what does that mean? And I don't, I have a textbook understanding. I have an understanding based on my own personal observations, but I still don't quite really understand, even though I have a very good understanding of who I am and what my neurodiversity is, but I still don't feel fully confident. So, I mean, how can someone develop the coping mechanisms and being able to communicate that effectively in a workplace situation or in a social environment if they don't have that understanding?
This is a very good question, Joseph. You see, where you were coming from, it sounds very static because there is no finite point. So no human being, neurodivergent or neurotypical, will ever be the same and will always remain the same. So the thing is, we have to look into identifying what are the static factors that are related to my personality, what type of person I am, and what are the dynamic factors. And yes, you are right. In order to, for all of us to explain ourselves, how we want to be treated and know our needs and communicate our needs, we have to understand what our needs are. Yes, that is the first step. And that is through lived experience, to living with each other, or to work on it with either with professionals or with families. It requires a lot of a reflexive attitude, but even the reflexivity is not always a given, because there are certain parts or certain traits in the neurodiverse spectrum where the level of reflexivity is low. And I mean, how can I look in a mirror when the mirror is broken? I only see a reflection of a broken mirror. So that's why, again, we need each other to help understand.
So that, for me, sounds like quite a strong metaphor for what you do with Shirin, in that the woman looking in the mirror is seeing a broken version
Yeah, they are. I think that, I mean, there is such an interesting conversation, this, and yeah, I'm overwhelmed just listening to it because it's just so rich. I think what is coming up for me here, in the sense of for women certainly, is the fact of you know who you are, but you know from the first up, and I really want the thing to be said. Yes, we are all neurodivergent in some way. Okay, and I love the idea that by 7, before the age of 7, we are there, but by then we're moving into more concretizing of our brain. So the thing that starts to make me think more about this is that when we're looking through perspectives, we're starting to create our maps. I think we are always becoming, and actually nothing is ever fixed. For me, nothing is fixed. It's just how slow the flow is going that will allow you to be more fluid or to be more in that static state. So how do we do that, and what is the learning or processing style that we have? And maybe that's where we've got to work with kids, because that's where we're going to make the biggest difference. But I wonder if we're categorizing people, and I know that we talk about neurodivergent being a subset or Asperger's. We're looking at categories. We're looking at categories. So what would it be like if we lived in a world that didn't have categories? How would that be? I mean, I would imagine it'd be pretty interesting. But it may make us focus on looking at people very, very differently. I loved Andrew's definition of what neurodiversity for Asperger's is looking at the world from a place of how we shift things. But even the word condition means that there is a constraint. There's a constraint with him. So how do we create something that has no constraint? Yeah. And how do we move that? So for women, certainly when they look at themselves, I call it imposter. I think from the moment we're born, we are in that dissonance where we have to meet our needs in the world and we have to survive. We have to orientate and navigate. I loved your Maria, you want to find our constraints, find our
boundaries,
our constant. And so we are always going to reorientate to a constant. And can we reorientate to that constant that is fluid, so that we can actually keep shifting and changing and going to that course correct, but not have it fixed?
Exactly.
So yeah, so from an imposter situation is women are looking at themselves certainly through the filters all the time, and they're making it about them. They're making it about them, so they don't know who they are. They don't know. And I think, sorry, you want to say something?
No, please carry on.
So I think we're naturally, all of us become imposters until we find the who we are. And that's pretty much looking and working and coming to a kind of conclusion that we're all of this. We all are neurodivergent in some way. And some people, you know, because we maybe not have homed in a little more, like more people that we say neurotypical divergent people, they would be more likely to have homed for that skill because that's part of where they did more and more and more of that, particularly if they're coping in society. I think for those that are not reflecting and a more difficult situation, which Mariella was saying, which was interesting, and I love that they are, some are unable to reflect. Most women or people in stress or feeling anxious or in those places, they see the broken mirror because they're unable to see any other perspective. So we have to teach them or help them start to kind of heal that mirror in some way. Or find a new one.
Okay, we're all diving in. Gabrielle, please.
There is also a very important aspect we must take into consideration. Neurodivergent or neurotypical, we all grow up with social learning. So a lot what we identify with today is actually not from us. It is socially learned in a very, very young age and sort of taken on as our own. That means to say your upbringing, your social environment, your first most important person you relate to in your life from your when you open your eyes into this world, all that. This has to be taken into consideration as well before you say I. So sometimes we act and behave out of something which is not us, but which we socially acquire.
Okay, I'm going to have to dive in there. I've been waiting to dive in for a while. I am so pleased we have a panel who are prepared to stick their oar in. So here's my observations and my challenges to you so far. Number one, I would suggest that we are all of a certain age, and that being of a certain age, it is easier to look back over our lives and see perspectives, and therefore see where other people are struggling where we did. But we all know, I've never even had children, but we all know that as much as we want, we cannot teach people to stop hurting themselves or stop doing something until they want to learn it. And they only really want to learn it after they've been hurt, if you're lucky. So basically, all you're really talking about, Andrew, is communication etiquette.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the difference between Asperger's or not, or dyslexic or not. We're talking about, this is how I am, this is how I work best. So it is, before you answer, I'm reading a book at the moment. Oh, I just finished it actually, called Winning. And it's having agency in your life, in your work. That's what seems to be key. Comments?
Communication is the thing, the biggest thing, the most important thing, because if you can't communicate effectively, you're scuppered. Doesn't matter whether you have a great idea or a great point. If you can't communicate that to others, you are not going to get anywhere further forward. I want to give you a very extreme example of something. Please. Very quickly. 20 odd years ago, there was a serial killer in this country, and
keep it light, eh?
Keep it light, exactly. And one day, his son, because we're talking about Map of the World and learned behavior that was Gabrielle was talking about, his son was invited by one of his school friends to come and do some homework at his house. And he got there and he found something quite alien to him. He found a loving family where they talked to each other in a nice and supportive and emotionally acceptable way. They were friendly, they were nice, they were polite, they offered him food, he had a cup of tea, things like that. And this kid of this serial killer had never seen anything or experienced anything like this in his life. His life was being beaten, being abused, being battered, the whole thing. And he actually said something. I don't know whether he said something to that parent or he said something to his child. And that resulted in Fred West and his wife being convicted of murder, serial murder. Yeah, he buried kids under his patio. He had people stay. And it only came about because that poor child's version of normal, this learned behavior, exactly what Gabrielle was talking about, was of abuse, beatings, and he did not know what a loving, normal family relationship was, where people were nice and kind to each other.
So that is extreme, but I understand why you've gone there. But this is the problem, and it's a challenge for you, Gabrielle. So you've heard of the term the marshmallow test? Have you? Yeah.
Yes,
have you read?
Yes,
has anyone read the book, The Marshmallow Test?
No, but I'm aware of the test.
Okay, so in the book, basically, this idea that our personality, our traits, there are some things which are more static, and there are some things which are more fluid. Not according to his observations. His observations is that all behavior is context specific. And so a potential serial killer from one set of environments could be the most caring person to animals, for example. So how can anyone watching this who feels different, what's the first step, Gabrielle?
It depends from what perspective you're seeing it.
What do you mean?
Which context?
It's all, as you say, context specific. I mean, you always have to look at the context. I mean, from what perspective are you seeing it? So if you want to rephrase or precise your question, I give the ball back to you.
Okie dokie.
Sorry.
Sorry. Okay, so a person, an entrepreneur, someone who's listening to Business Live Global in, you know, any country around the world. We're networking with people all over the world now. So someone watching this from their own perspective, looking out into the world. Andrew, I'll come to you on this. You didn't know until 7 years ago. And so did you go through 50 years of having problems, or just that you thought other people were a bit strange?
No, completely the opposite. I did have 51 years of problems of dealing with people, family, friends, work colleagues. But they were
a problem for you?
A problem for both, because a problem for me because my version of normal, that horrible word again, is not the same as their version of normal. I was different, and I stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, the bullying and the abuse I had through college and school as a subject for another day. But I did not know until I got my diagnosis that my version of normal was not everyone's version of normal. That how I viewed the world, my map of the world, my perspective on everything, I did not know that that was not the same as everyone else's.
So, but this is the thing. So Joseph and I are both NLP practitioners, and the first thing they say in any NLP book is the map is not the territory. And consequently, the show is supposed to be, I feel like a freak, know your value, because I think there are many people out there in the workplace and in society who have they've developed specialist skills. Because that's what it is ultimately, isn't it? Is that your brain, your cognition, your manner, your style in the way that you operate. So not a fixed personality, but the way you flow through the world is you develop a skill. So
yes,
there are,
and we're different people to different people in different circumstances.
Yeah,
you would behave differently with your parents than you would to your boss.
Indeed. So this is the point, Andrew, is that you said that when you were explaining your growing up, it was you were the one that stood out like a sore thumb in comparison to them, which sounds as if them is a bigger group, which is why I'm having a struggle. Because so, okay, Gabrielle, you asked me to refine my question.
Yes,
on that 180-degree spectrum, where this side is neurotypical and this side is neurodivergent, where do you think the world stands percentage-wise?
Can I jump in?
Please.
Yes, please.
I was going to say everywhere, but go ahead, Joseph.
I mean, you just answered what I wanted to say. I mean, you cannot generalize.
But you have to, because
why do we have to? Why do we have to? Because we have established that our world is full of diversity and full of uniqueness. So where would this leave us when we gave a sweeping statement where the world is today? Because whatever you will say, you will have a counter argument. Whatever statement I make now, then there would be always a yes but and a yes but and but. So this is it. The world is complex, unique. We as human beings, we are the most destructive creatures that there are, and at the same time, looking at it from a different perspective, here we are, the five of us in a position to discuss this beautiful topic, to demonstrate the diversity and the uniqueness at the same time. And I think what the world needs to learn is to stop discriminating. Because with labeling, and here coming back to Shireen's, why do we have to categorize? Because our brain or our intellect needs an orientation point in order to develop another theory, or to develop a communication strategy, or to develop a sort of a framework we can operate with.
Okay,
Yes, but we should.
I'm going. Joseph.
I need to jump in here because we've gone back to Shireen, which is something I wanted to do for the last 10 or 20 minutes now, and you've also brought up a lot of things here. I mean, first off, it's ideal for us to think that we can live in a world where we cannot categorize and label. Unfortunately, it's our human nature, and it's not going to happen. But when we take so the aspect is that comes into play is when we categorize, we're categorizing for a reason, and that comes back to when we take a look at neotypical, they're considered generalists, right? And when we look at neodiversity, they're considered specialists. So it's defining where the generalists belong, and it's defining where the specialists belong. Then when we take a look at that aspect, and now this brings up a book in regards to why we categorize. I'm currently reading a book, and I've mentioned it to you, Andrew, Pattern Seekers. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting dynamic of understanding how the brain works and where autism kind of comes into play. And they talk about in the second chapter, the if and then approach, because we're very logical. The argument is that we're very logical thinkers, which then leads into the aspect of categorizing, of seeing patterns, of leading that into invention. And we all are able to do the if and then. So it's an aspect of a theory in this book that we are all naturally categorizing through this if and then approach. So now comes the aspect, where we're trying to identify these different maps. And it's not about the map. When in actuality, I disagree with NLP. It is about the map. It's about knowing where we are and where we think and how we approach things. But it's also understanding the aspect of how the mind works, going back to that theory of if and then. So when we take a look at where neodiversity is, or where the world is, I mean, that now comes to another aspect, something that I've noticed, is that we're very visual people. If we don't see it, we don't believe it, we don't understand it. I know you disagree, but from my observations of seeing human behavior, I can see that we're very visual people. So when we take a look at neodiversity, it's something that we can't see. So we jump to the different conclusions. We jump into the miscommunications and not being able to explain.
There are so many things I want to pick you up on.
Well, there's an interesting thing. The eyes are the last to develop, and they're probably the most complex.
Yes.
So it's going to take a huge amount of brain.
Yeah.
So there's a high likelihood that we see, and we see so much more than our little foveal vision. Our eyes see peripherally all the time. So I absolutely think we see a lot, and we give a lot of attention to the visual. And I think that we probably give less to the others because we haven't homed in on them afterwards.
Right.
spend so much
May
time
I
on
may I
Google.
jump in here? Excuse me
Yes,
for
may.
being rude. May I jump in here? This is a perfect example how we see the world from a very ethnocentric perspective. Because what would a visually impaired person say to this argument?
That's a different circumstance. But if we take a look how people jump to the wrong conclusions and they jump into their tribalism, which we were talking about earlier about how the world is, from my observation, it's based on the aspect of how they're seeing things, because they're very visual people. Yes, and we're dealing with the someone who's blind, the visually impaired. That's a different circumstances. You know, going back to Shireen's point, their perspective has honed on different skills.
But this is also we. When we speak about we don't speak about us and them. I'm challenging you here on that, Joseph.
Fair enough.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Is that actually I thought we were coming on here with some unusual brains, which we all are, and we've all brought a whole range of different energies to the conversation, which is great. The problem is, how do we help? How do you identify the people you want to deal with? Before I throw that question out to the room, just another message from our sponsors. He said, oh, wrong one. No, not that one.
Yo, what's up?
Baby, let's go.
Top business tips, extraordinary entrepreneur interviews, cuckoo reviews, promotional films, and so much more. This is your Business Live Global.
So we're coming towards the end of our recording here, and I think it's fair to say that we're going to have another show to delve into this more. I very much like the energy. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation today. What I'm going to have to do is this. I'm going to have to be cruel and give you 90 seconds each to sum up a message, not about your perspectives, but a message looked down the barrel of the camera to someone out there watching this, and speak to them as to whatever you want to speak to them about. I'll go ladies first, gentlemen second. I will count silently in my head, and then
Will I put the timer on?
Oh, have you got a timer?
I could put on a timer. You want 90
Oh,
seconds?
yeah. Oh, in that case, you can run this bit. Woohoo!
Okay. let me put on a new timer.
Well
1
volunteered,
second.
Joseph.
Yeah.
90 seconds, you said, right?
Yeah.
All right. All right,
Okay.
so
Gabrielle.
From what we have discussed today, it is very important you understand, or you learn to understand who you are, what your needs are, and how you communicate these needs. This is all from my end.
Lovely. Thank you. Shireen.
And I think that's exactly what we're talking about, because part of what I want is that you begin to know who you are, your source energy, and how you can communicate that. And if you find that that's not happening, then there are many, you may be neurodivergent, and just come and find someone that will be able to help you.
Very good. Very good. Andrew.
I think it's important to understand that every one of us has needs and wants and desires and right to be heard, to feel valued. And if you're not feeling valued in what you're doing, then you need to take a bit of a hard look about the environment that you're in and whether that is actually conducive to you or not, because there are times when we all have to knuckle down at work and put up with things that we wouldn't necessarily ideally want to get something out. But when that becomes the norm, when that becomes consistent and constant, then you're not being valued, you're being taken for granted. And I think if you're finding that you're having difficulties communicating with those around you, it's time to say, well, what can I do to try and make this better? And the way to do that would be to have a word with your superiors. Write it down. Say, I'm struggling with this aspect, this, and this. These are the three things I'm struggling with. This is what you can do. This is what we can do together to help me be better at what I'm doing, so that I can support the business, support you, and we all meet the business needs. And
Fantastic.
that's really important.
Yeah, so basically self-awareness and self-responsibility to make your life easier. Very good. Joseph?
Sure. So, I mean, everyone has said pretty much what I was going to say. So you've taken all my best words. So I'm going to be very specific here now. The workplace and as entrepreneurs, you need to become very self-aware about who you are and what kind of vision that you want for your establishment in your business or as an entrepreneur. That also requires for the neurodivergent to have a safe place to be able to communicate, to be able to work, and to be able to be productive. And that requires the neurodivergent to become a self-advocate. You need to advocate for yourself. You need to voice, and you need to get other people to understand and recognize that you are there.
Very good, very good. Okay, well, listen, I would say, so my wrap up to the show, this didn't go in really according to plan at all, which is always my best kind of recording. What I'd say to people out there on LinkedIn, where I'll be posting this, is that I'll tag in all our guests in the posts. They'll tag us all in their posts. Connect with these individual brains, because as it turns out, none of us are normal. Some of us are less normal than others. But understanding yourself and taking self-awareness is going to be key to you having a successful, however you measure that, a successful life that you can actually contribute to society. So feel like a freak. Maybe now I'll have to moderate the language, but I like it, and I've already recorded the jingle, so yeah, what are you going to do? Everyone, would you like to wave goodbye to our various assembled social media guru type people? Yeah, woo, 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 woo.